Good evening and welcome everyone back to fractalu.com. I'm Dan Winter. As you all know, the subject for this evening's conversation is alchemy, plasma fusion, wave physics versus the human oneness experience. We're really going to talk about the science, hopefully in some practical terms as well, relating the deep spiritual mystery of alchemy directly to the human oneness concept, and then talking even in technical terms about alchemy as physics in terms of cold plasma and fusion and isotope transitions. So we begin with a sort of spiritual poetic side of alchemy, and we end hopefully with a serious sort of scientific wave mechanic commentary on isotope transitions and cold fusion, all based on the idea that the centripetal mechanism called alchemy is the essence of what is really implosion, which is what we have been talking about here for many years. Our new website for all of the technical projects of the Implosion Group is now implosiongroup.com, so you can see all of the science and technical and technology invention projects there summarized, links and introductions. And just a little note here again about the philosophy of fractalu.com. Our philosophy is that the information is essentially free. So although there's a $10 donation, for example, requested for this course, in fact, anyone that wants to join us and feels that $10 is a bit difficult, just drop an email, info@fractalfield.com, and we'll send you a free invite, because we definitely want to make this available to anyone that's interested. And as always, at fractalu.com, the full video of this course will be available to the world immediately or within a day or two after the course. And we have many thousands of people who look at these videos, and we're glad to have you with us. We're focused on the self-empowering science of spirituality, and we do mean the serious science and physics of spiritual evolution. That's what we're talking about. You all know many of the related websites. Fractalfield.com was the original with our group. And now our immensely successful plasma technology, Therify.net, and the Therify Plasma Tech, the Prairie Plasma Healing System, is now in about 10 countries. We just had amazing results reports from South Africa, and we have about 6 systems going in there, and we're looking at several in Norway, and we have Belgium and Prague and Bosnia and US and a major center in Australia. And things are going great. So we're very happy that the technology of implosion plasma fusion is demonstrating the philosophy, which is what tonight's about. So, welcome everyone. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat window. And also, we may have a bit of a cameo appearance with our historical academic specialist here. Tonight's course is myself primarily describing the connection between the alchemy in the plays of Shakespeare versus the science of plasma fusion to make human oneness possible, and then linking that to the alchemy physics of the actual symmetry, platonic symmetry of atomic table, or sort of rewriting your chemistry class, and finishing with some serious physics with contribution originally from Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth Donovan, on isotope transitions, demonstrating an example of plasma fusion alchemy based on how to make charge collapse non-destructively, which is what implosion and alchemy is about. So we conclude with some serious science. So we are endeavoring to make a connection between the sort of historically very interesting stories, why everyone agrees that most of Shakespeare is about alchemy. But so when they told you in your literature class that when Shakespeare is about alchemy, you kind of scratched your head and said, well, now, what do they really mean by that? And if Shakespeare is one of the most profound writers in history, what was his contribution to the science of alchemy? That's part of what tonight's about. The part of that story that I'm going to try to tell is really relating it to the serious science, the wave mechanics of implosion and charge collapse, non-destructive compression, fractality, as it were. Now with us, hopefully in a cameo role this evening, Teresa Burns, who is a co-author with Vincent Bridges on many books and papers on the connection between John Dee, Edward Kelly, and Shakespeare, and the actual historically documented detail about the role that Shakespeare, as Francis Garland, played in appearing in John Dee's Notebook. And that, for example, the play The Tempest, and tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about Midsummer Night's Dream. So that story I will touch on to some extent this evening, but our cameo guest appearance tonight with Teresa Burns, who is playing with her microphone as we speak. She may be able to say hi here. We'll see. She's there with Alan. Teresa is doing a follow-up course in this series. I believe it's 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. You can look at fractalu.com, Teresa Burns' course, on the actual historical documented detail. Now, Teresa Burns does dates and places and notebooks and historical accuracy and converses and publishes papers with history research scholars. So that is respectable academics on illustrating what credible evidence there is that Shakespeare, in fact, learned the story of the Tempest and Prospero directly from Dee and Kelly in Prague, who had just sent to UK the purest gold ever measured in history by the Royal Society of Britain from the alchemy they did there in Prague. And then apparently Shakespeare was there learning some lessons about stirring up tornadoes, and a big one shortly thereafter called the heptagonal working in John Dee's notes quite evidently took out the Spanish Armada, later called the Tempest in Shakespeare. Now, this is a colorful story. Can we prove it? Well, we can give some pretty interesting evidence here. Remember, my essential enthusiasm is not so much to prove the history, although certainly from an academic perspective, that's what Teresa does, and that's why we've invited her. But my enthusiasm is to illustrate the science and the pure principles of wave mechanics and physics in such a way to be self-empowering. And from that point of view, I find, for example, the alchemic story of how John Dee did the heptagonal working to make that big tornado that apparently took out the Spanish Armada, later called the Tempest by Shakespeare. The meteorology had never been before seen in history, the way a storm came out of the North Sea like that. And the Spaniards who got blown to the west coast of Ireland are still growing up there today. So clearly something happened. So we're going to look a little bit about, the plasma physics of tornado making. Remember. Welcome, Ham. Welcome. We're just chatting about Shakespeare, John Dee, and making tornadoes, which is an alchemic process, we think. But that is going to lead us then to the subject of a future course to be led by Alan, who is with us, Alan Moore, who is an expert and somewhat clairvoyant and an expert in the technical details of Ophanim Enochian magic from John Dee and Kelly, and leads expertly Ophanim Enochian ritual in such a way that we have personally seen, well, I won't say blow the doors off the church, but we definitely have seen incredibly powerful plasma events associated, lots of charge, associated with rituals from the Ophanim Enochian tradition that Alan has been able to lead. So in the tradition of Vincent Bridges and his work with us on Ophanim Enochian, and putting in the chat window the main web article about that, goldenmean.info/Ophanim. Point being that then in a few weeks further on, then Alan Moore will be leading a course with us here at fractalu.com on the serious science and practice of Ophanim Enochian magic. Now, I guess, Alan, your microphone is still not fired up, and you said that Teresa was going upstairs to try another computer to see if we got that mic fired up. So we'll see if we have the scheduled cameo appearances lined up here. But in any case, we're now going to proceed with our story. So our story begins. With the story of John Dee. Now, John Dee was said to have the largest library in Europe, to speak most of the languages or many of the languages of planet Earth. He was said to be one of the leading mathematicians of his day, and he was clearly the advisor of Queen Elizabeth, and he apparently was a pioneer in alchemy, which we're about to talk about. And he dedicated a good part of his life to the mathematics of what was called the hypercube. And here we'll have some pictures now. This is This is the hypercube as it applies to the geometric design of Shakespearean theater. So we have some other pictures in the other section here. Let's see if we can find those pictures about what Dee and Kelly meant by hypercube. I think I had those in this group here. Let's see if we find that. This is Ophain and Enochian pictures. Let me see. So what does the mathematics of the hypercube have to do with Ophain and Enochian magic and alchemy? This is Vincent Bridges' drawing, who worked closely with Teresa and ourselves in Ophain and Enochian magic, and a lot of what I learned about the stories of alchemy comes from Vincent Bridges. This is Vincent Bridges' analysis of the symmetry of the Enochian Ophainum letters in the tablet of El Nalvaj, and the shape of the tornadoes that are wormholes that form this ancient alphabet. We know the vortex, the so-called spiral on the donut, which is basically vortex theory, cast shadows, which we have animated elsewhere to be the origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit. I'll put that, most of you know that work, goldenmean.info/DNA ring, all those animations. Well, another part of that science of how vortex get glued together to make ancient languages here in Darlene was Vincent's partner here, but Darlene did this beautiful analysis here that if you take these parts of the spiral vortex off the tornado and you index the pieces of those spirals, here's a vortex inside a vortex, here's an angle or a point of view or literally a transecting plane through the double vortex cone. Remember, phase conjugation is pine cones kissing noses. Vortex kissing noses. We were just having that conversation about phase conjugate cause of gravity being pine cones kissing, as Mark Rohrbaugh was so kind as to note again here from our discussion of that fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. So that was the technical article saying that two light cones opposing can be shown quite literally to be the mechanism of gravity mechanics. Gravity making is very closely related to the science of tornado making, so this is a relevant conversation. So if you index pieces of those cones and you assemble how those angles get glued together, you get this table here of the Ophain and Enochian letters. Now, why is that fun? Well, here's the table. Here's parts of the table. That is fun because apparently if you assemble your pieces of tornadoes correctly, you make a centripetal force called implosion or alchemy, and you get to steer some tornadoes, as apparently John Dee was able to do. So the other thing about tornado making that makes them centripetal is that if you get the relative angle of their embedding correctly, such that the little tornado fits inside the bigger tornado non-destructively or implosively. Notice that the tornado inside this tornado, the donut in the donut, is golden ratio in size, so that the little tornado's inertia interferes constructively with the bigger tornado's inertia by golden ratio, which is the wave mechanics solution to constructive wave interference, and therefore the solution to embeddability, the solution to fractality, the solution to non-destructive compression. And Valerie wants to play with that toy. Oh, okay, I won't tell him you're here. So getting the little tornado nested inside the bigger tornado non-destructively initiates a process called fractality or implosion, which makes the waves add and multiply constructively towards center, creating gravity, centripetal forces, implosion, and alchemy, and non-destructive compression. So that's what we've been talking about for a lifetime here at fractalfield.com. And this evening, we're going to apply that poetically first to the myth of John Dee and Kelly and the tornado making, and later apply that to the physics of alchemy and isotope transitions. So the first part of this story is about what was that relationship with the, oh, here's that lovely picture of John Dee. I'm sort of bouncing around these pictures here, but this is, Vincent and I had various, we point fingers at each other and accuse each other of having some past life memories of Dee and Kelly, and we don't need to go there at this point, but clearly there's lots of soul memory, as it were, of these stories of Dee and Kelly. So, and Dee is, facetiously called 007 in the sense that when he supposedly wrote his little notes back to Queen Elizabeth, being the first of the spies to help the Queen defend herself from the Catholic Inquisition, the Spanish Armada. And when John Dee would write "For Your Eyes Only," he wrote the two little circles with a little line down, which looked like her glasses. You see, "For Your Eyes Only" means look through your glasses only, but of course that also is 007. So, but that's just a story, and I don't think the academics can support that. But the mythology of 007 really kind of fits here. They had black budget ops definitely in the time of Queen Elizabeth, when King Rudolph of Prague clearly realized that most of the planet would be subjected to the crazy whims of the Catholic Inquisition and King Philip if the Spanish Armada were to win. And John Dee told Queen Elizabeth approximately 1 year ahead of time that he was going to make the storm that then did take out the Spanish Armada. And so we are saying, well, we would like to understand the science because we're not into miracle worship here. We find that disempowering. So we need to get to the science here. Yes, where is the science lesson? Okay. Well, to start the science lesson, we're going to start with John Dee's hypercube. Now remember, we showed you that picture of the hypercube. Basically, a cube stellated in all directions, which is basically 6 cubes around one central cube, 7 cubes, is, the stellated cube is, in effect, the next dimension. A lot of the people, the mathematicians, you say, draw me a hypercube, the next dimension for the cube, get up off your cross and follow me, get up off a flat land in the next dimension. So if you ask a mathematician to draw you the next dimension, he takes a cube and puts one on each side of it, and 6 cubes around one. And that's the hypercube. And that was the hypercube to Vincent Bridges as he drew it in the physics of where the Ophanim-Enochian letters came from. However, remember, we're talking about this because John Dee, as one of the leading mathematicians of his day, one of his specialties was the mathematics of the hypercube. And later, those drawings of the hypercube apparently became what inspired the design of the Shakespearean theater. So here we're looking at Shakespearean theater, cube inside a cube, or hypercube, or the symmetry of the cube is an octahedron. And this is the point. Let's see. Now, if you look at the camera view here now, I don't know if you can see in the camera very well, but I'm going to zoom. This is a mechanical. I'm doing a mechanical zoom here. This is the Star Mother kit. It's dodeca inside dodeca. Dodeca equals dodeca. The only possible three-dimensional fractal, origin of the Grail, and hydrogen. And inside, you see there's a cube. Actually, you can't see it very well there, can you? But maybe take my word for it. But there's a green cube inside the blue dodecahedron there. And inside that cube, there are red vertex, which is an octahedron. Now, the tetracube octa has 7 arrows, 7 axes of symmetry, which we're going to get to in a moment, because that's in the Ophanim sigil of truth. You have a heptagram, which is part of tonight's story, the heptagonal working of John Dee, on the outside, and a pent on the inside. 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. We now know that's the symmetry recipe for the Anu, the heart of hydrogen, and the heart of the sun, and the heart of the human, the braiding algorithm of DNA, 7 spins, 5 spins. It's the whole heart of the sun story, the Anu story. And that 7-5 symmetry was the Ophanim sigil of truth, which is how you create pure intention in a Ophanim magic. And incidentally, the Cherokee, who called the Ophanim the Adawi, there's Arboretum had 7 arrows, and I helped them put 5 in the center. So there's John Dee. He's got his hypercube. And later that became the symmetry index for the origin of Ophanim-Enochian true angel magic. Now, remember, many, if not a significant number of physicists today believe that the physics of angels is the plasma physics of the way the universe is assembled. Witness plasmauniverse.com. Plasma universe physics is very popular among scientists today, and most of those scientists believe that these beautiful pictures of interstellar plasma clouds, which look so alive, so mindful, they believe that plasma physics is angelology. That is to say, what angels are. And in fact, a cloud of plasma is precisely what we believe on a small scale is your aura, your ka, your boat into the underworld, and what you take with you through death. Literally, in the sense of physics, being cold plasma, which is to say, a cloud of plasma, which is simply a cloud of charge, normally is hot because you have to heat the electrons, get excited enough to get the charge spinning and get the charge cloud separate and floating in a cloud separate from the atoms. So normally for a plasma field you would have heat. However, there are certain conditions in which a cloud of plasma does not require heat. Notably, at therify.net, the tip of the plasma tube being fed 500,000 volts seems to spontaneously get colder. Cold plasma. And when Schauberger's vortex famously, just before the water vortex began generating voltage from gravity, it would spontaneously begin getting colder. That phenomena, which is called non-destructive compression, is called implosion, and is what Schauberger was famous for. So it probably is true to say that your aura, which probably is the most important part about you because that's what you take with you when you die and when you lucid dream, is in fact quite literally a cloud of charge called cold plasma. Why are we discussing that here? We're discussing that here because we would like to understand what are the charge symmetry dynamics that allow human auras to fuse implosively, alchemically. Because when human auras come together and converge non-destructively, that, we believe strongly, is the wave mechanics of human oneness experience. And that is what the first part of this course is about. And we believe that that is exactly the physics, and I do mean the physics behind the Shakespearean design for alchemy in the plays, starting with the Shakespearean theater, which, as we see from these pictures, we believe was literally a design inspired by John Dee, specifically John Dee's work on the hypercube. And we're using this book here, let's zoom in a little bit, called Squaring the Circle is the key to John Dee's design, hypercube, question mark. Is that the origin of the Globe Theater, Shakespearean theater? And again, the historical detail on this we're going to leave to Alan and Teresa later, but we're going to try to outline what may be, in fact, the wave mechanics right now. That's what we're here about. We're here about the science. So it is commonly discussed among historians that the Shakespearean theater idea for the Shakespearean theater came from John Dee and his hypercube work. Now, our question is why? What's the pure principle? Here's the Globe Theater, obviously stellated tetracubic. Now let's look at the Globe Theater. Oh, here's the four pine cones kissing noses. Oops. Four pine cones kissing noses here, which is the wave mechanics of phase conjugation, which is what we're talking about. So as you're looking at our cubic designs for Shakespearean theater and what's happening to the emotional field on the stage, which we now know is a stellated cube, it's octahedral, be thinking about the fact that when you wish to make lasers phase conjugate, you arrange them literally, as in this picture, in a cube. It's called four-wave mixing and phase conjugate optics. And when you do that very accurately, and I mean nano wavelength accuracy, you produce what's called optical phase conjugation and negentropy, self-organization, charge implosion, very interesting things like time reversal, introduction to fusion 101, non-destructive compression, perfect pine cones kissing noses, start cubically, and then embed and stellate a cube in a dodeca. And you see, that's the point we're making here also, was that if you take the cube that we know is in this dodeca. If you take that cube, I don't know if you can see it very clearly. You can't see it very clearly there. I guess you take my word for it. If you take that cube in the center there and you tilt it 32 degrees and you rotate and you blink 5 times, you exactly have the next dimension, which is a dodecahedron. And Vincent and I must have had 100 wonderful, lovely arguments about whether, in fact, the dodecahedron was the hypercube. In fact, it was one of our prime philosophical differences. However, be that as may, we know that the next dimension is the ability to superpose the next axes of spin symmetry. So specifically, if you've got a tetracube, tetraoctacube, in a wave interference phenomena, a symmetry group, as it were, tetraoctacube are the same thing. They have 7 axes of spin, tetraoctacube, they're all one nest. Whereas dodecaecosa, are another nest, which is to say 5 spins as opposed to 7. Now, the way you get from one to the next is this magical 32-degree chin angle of the Sphinx, which you tilt the cube up and embed it in the dodeca, and most of you have seen my animations of that at goldenbean.info/Merkabah, MEKABBAH. Put the link in the chat window. So I am saying that the real solution to the hypercube, which is, John Dee didn't get there and Vincent didn't get there, but I believe that the real next dimension, the real hypercube, is in fact the way the dodeca fits in the real way the cube fits in the dodecahedron. But it's right in another sense. If you want to say in the 7-spin system, that's always tetracube octave, whereas the pent system, 5 spins versus 7, is dodecaecosa. So in terms of physics, if you ask me rigorously, well, where does that show up in phase conjugate optics physics? I would say to you that those 4 lasers, actually it's 2 pairs, opposing pairs of lasers arranged to this 4-wave mixing, which is obviously cubic, which is the definition of phase conjugate optics, that they, in order to make a phase conjugate mirror, now remember, phase conjugate mirrors are really magical. I just want to grab a little tea here 1 second. When I get too enthused, my voice gets a little tired. 1 second here. Yep. After all these years of speaking so much, I have to be careful with my throat. So, phase conjugate mirrors are some of the most interesting and wonderful examples of spiritual physics, aka magic, there are. Like, apparently, according to Bill, Elizabeth, and Vincent, the bottom of the water of Nostradamus's scrying cup had a very dark coating, as in phase conjugate mirror. Apparently, the orb, the sphere, the show stone that John Dee used, which you can still find in the Royal British Museum, had some of the super high dielectric constant qualities required to make a phase conjugate mirror. Apparently, Lucifer's eye, as in the Kaaba stone of the Muslims, later ground up to be the Philosopher's Stone projected powder, which enabled Kelly to make the gold in the alchemy with John Dee. It's a glass meteorite with gold vaporized through it, based on golden ratio. Apparently, it had the super high dielectric constant of how you make a phase conjugate mirror. So that brings us exactly to where I was going in this physics conversation. Why phase conjugate mirrors are so fun. Remember, phase conjugate mirror, time reversal, self-organization, fun stuff, interesting, learn something, negentropic, it's really rich. But the miracle in physics is that if you get these lasers meeting like this picture right in front of us, 4-wave mixing exactly opposing lasers, and you want them to conjugate and make all this magic, you need something called the nonlinear material at the center, which is the heart of the phase conjugate mirror. Echoes of the Kaaba stone, echoes of the Philosopher's Stone, echoes of Nostradamus's mirror, echoes of the Girku, echoes of the fire crystal, of the Toy Stone. So this whole thing about, magic mirrors it could be instruction into some serious physics. Now, if you were to ask a physicist or scientist, what material enables the making of a phase conjugate mirror? In other words, what stuff do you have to put exactly where those lasers meet? Oh, it looks like Alan was just playing with turning his camera on. You could put your camera on, Alan or Teresa, but what we're really hoping for was just a little bit of audio, if you could, and there's no hurry. So that we can introduce Teresa with historical commentaries for cameo appearance. But back to the thought. So, okay. If you were to ask a physicist, like, okay, I want to make this magic mirror because, I like magic and I like physics and they're one and the same. It's all cool. Yeah, I agree. Hey, I think this is a screenplay waiting. In fact, I actually sent the letter to Hermione, to Emma Watson, saying, "Look, you were talking about alchemy and in the early Harry Potter, and we got the movie ready for the kids. So I tell you, this is the movie ready for the kids. We're going to tell them what the Philosopher's Stone really was, and reality has topped science fiction for fun just 1,000 times over. It's so fun." So, anywho, yes, you're right. This is a screenplay. Please help me sell the screenplay, will you? Because it's fun. So, anywho, you're asking this physicist, you're saying, well, what stuff do you put in the middle of the lasers in order to make the phase conjugate mirror? And they will answer to you. They will answer something with an extremely high dielectric constant. Barium strontium titanate is an example, which is the sandwich between the two capacitive plates, which means that when you ring that capacitor like a bell, if the dielectric constant is high enough, you're extracting energy from the vacuum because the bell rings with more energy than the hammer you hit it with. It's so cool. This is key to zero-point energy. I mean, we're getting into all the physics mysteries here when you really understand high dielectric constant. Like, why do you need organic materials to make a house so that your aura can breathe and therefore steer tornadoes? High dielectric constant. Why do organic materials make high dielectric constant? Because every molecule that ever wanted to join that very exciting, sexy club called life sees the bumper sticker at the door which says get fractal or get dead. And so every molecule joins the club, rearranges itself to a fractal, which is, say, charge distribution efficiency, which is called high dielectric constant, efficiency of capacitance to ring like a bell. So the thing is, physicists really don't know why certain materials with very high dielectric constant make phase conjugate mirrors. Well, I will tell you, the key is that the geometry at a molecular level of what makes the phase conjugate mirror substance work is here. Barium strontium titanate arranged in a macromolecular matrix, that's dodecaecosa, which is how you make cold plasma centripetal, which is to say, embeds the cube into the dodeca. So here is the cube of the lasers right in front of us, called four-wave mixing, the only way you make phase conjugation happen in optics. And in the center of the phase conjugate mirror, the cube gets to rotate in the dodeca, barium strontium titanate, high dielectric constant, and that's what really makes the phase conjugate mirror work, because the cube got embedded in the dodecaecosa, implosively, alchemically, and centripetally. And that allows the conjugate point where the pine cones kiss noses perfectly in the middle there to actually focus all those optical and charge flux lines to the convergence point where they fuse in cold fusion and sort perfectly, because in that fusion point, only the perfectly shareable waves survive. And that is the essence of why phase conjugation creates self-organization negentropy, because only the waves would fit the phase discipline emerge from that point. And that, we can discuss later, is the physics of the reason that rainbows and color exist. also the reason perception exists, and the reason gravity exists, and the reason objects fall to the ground, which we will get to later. But to finish our story, click. So I wanted to show the pictures here, wait, of the actual theater. Oh, yes. Okay, we're going back to the theater now. Now, this is the point where we were going to have Teresa just do a quick sharing. Yes, okay, here's the opposing emotions as in Midsummer Night's Dream. This is the part of our story we're supposed to do now. Let's just, okay. So now we have set the stage, quote unquote, for the climax of this part of the story. Have we set the stage? This is Shakespeare's stage. It's called the Globe Theater, which is, now we know, a hypercube.
Hey, Dan, can you hear me?
Oh, there's Terry. Wonderful. Yes. Okay, good.
There's going to be a terrible echo. I'm in my office here.
That's it. See, if you turn your speakers down a bit so you can just hear me, then we can hear you without echo, I think.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's better. So we're just getting to the part where I was hoping Terry would show up, and here she is. It's another miracle.
I've been listening to you the whole time. I just couldn't speak.
That's okay. Well, great. So the story, we're just at that moment in the story where we're saying, okay, now here's basically the Shakespearean theater, which is, let's see, do we have the other picture of the theater? Yes, there it is. So the Shakespearean theater here is essentially, cubic octa. There's Shakespearean theater, cube octa. And here is the stage. Okay. Now notice in the stage, you got the opposing points of view. Cube octa. Okay, now we've got a sequence of opposing points of view. We're laying this out, and Shakespeare's play is about alchemy. Now let's say we're doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and Teresa is very much she's a professor of literature and very much skilled at this. So let's see. Now we're on the stage, we're doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and the characters come out, and they do a sequence of opposite emotions, question mark, in Midsummer Night's Dream. Would you like to comment, Terry?
Well, in that play, which is the most, Vincent used to talk about that play as being a sort of initiatory play. It's one where you show everything in its most obvious form. So there's 4 couples. He would look, and the couples are mismatched, if you know the play. So nobody is with the lover they belong with. They go into the woods. Oberon does some magic. Many things happen, and at the end, everyone is with the right couple. There's the Duke of Athens. Those of you that know Dan Brown's Inferno, maybe you read about the staircase of the Duke of Athens in Florence. I mean, there's all kinds of other neat things about it. But so if you look at these couples as not quite opposite, you're trying to get that person with their opposite so they can transform. There is some connections with Paracelsian medicine and other things like that. And I could go on, but I think I'll wait till next week and go on. But
Terry's going to really go into the detail on this in her course, yes? Mm-hmm. And you see the fun
4 couples, there's your cube octa.
Go ahead, Terry. Sorry.
No, with your 4 couples, 8 people, there's your cube octa, and they are trying to get sort of in the right place of charge.
Yes, so beautiful, perfect, Terry. Thank you so much. So we got 4 couples in Midsummer Night's Dream, and they're not quite lined up correctly. And then they go through a sequence of opposing emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't it true that, like in the first scene, like there's anger or hate, and then there's joy, and then there's love, and then it's like extreme opposites?
Well, okay. So the first one, you have the Duke of Athens bringing in his bride, who was the Queen of the Amazons, who he has, quote, wooed with his sword, which doesn't sound, terribly romantic to most of us. But so you're going to perhaps, since that Theseus assigned him to Kether, perhaps you're going to assign a different place on the tree to other people. However, but he's the ruler of Athens. Athens is supposed to be a just society, but it's not. So then you have Hermia wants to get married to her lover. Her father can't stand him. Hermia, like Hermes, only she's a she, and her father forbids it. So her choice is basically go off to a nunnery, be banished. So she and her lover decide to run off into the woods. So a series of extreme emotions. Yes, there's also planning for a wedding celebration, and the wedding celebration looks suspect. There's a play within a play where they're going to put on a play that is, in a sense, almost a parody of a Romeo Juliet kind of plot. So let's say there's a lot of really people who are blocked from bliss.
Yes, good. And so this is what we're trying to look at here now. The point I would like to make here is that the opposing pairs of people and opposing pairs of emotion in exactly 4 couples cubic array create a situation which enables plasma fusion and therefore the experience of oneness. Now, Vincent actually explained this to me once. He said, if this is done well, by the end of the play, everyone, in the beginning you see somebody doing some kind of emotion like anger and stupidity and hate. And you say, oh, I don't want to feel like that. And then you see someone else doing an emotion like joy or love, and it seems all superficial. You say, oh, I'm not quite ready for that. But then the idea is that as you go through the sequence of pairs of opposites, suddenly you realize that, oh, there's a little bit of everyone in me, and I am them, and they are me. And suddenly, oh, I identify with all of the characters as an archetype of a piece of my life. Now, I wanted to give an example of that, which I think is very useful in terms of spiritual education here. And my example is as follows. We have a lot of people come to us and they say, well, you have said that the only way of getting immortal is to have enough charge or bliss to get a very coherent aura, to take that through death and ultimately through the heart of the sun. And they say to us, well, gee, what's the first step? That sounds tricky. And there's some shamanic advice about this, which says you find initially your aura does not have the electric coherence necessary to do things like steer a tornado, shake a planet, and go through the heart of the sun. So to get the critical mass or centripetal force for your aura as a tornado, you do something called form a soul group. And in practical terms, that requires something, or at least a very good example of that, is assembling a group like your soul group, where eventually your soul group learns how to lucid dream together. Now remember, when we're saying that the ability to dream coherently, which is to say you go to the dream and you come back with something testable, something where you met someone or did something, retrieved information in a way that was coherent enough to show that there was a definite grounded relationship to reality, namely quote unquote lucid dreaming / astral travel / remote viewing, which we believe is directly correlate to phase coherence in your aura as cold plasma, something ancients called your ka, as in your boat into the underworld, as in Merkaba, which later became the word Catholic and Cathar. And our favorite joke is now we have the electrical apparatus to measure then whether the Pope is a Catholic by evaluating the coherence of his aura, GDV, etc. So at any rate, the way you then form this soul group requires a good way to do it, not the only way, but a good way to do it is to join that soul group in such a way as to learn to lucid dream together. Valerie, could you mind closing that window? Would you mind just, and I'm just going to put my shirt on here now. It's finally getting cooler here. I can put my respectable shirt on. Now, the way to form a group which is able to lucid dream together, and remember, hint, Alchemy in Shakespeare's theater, Oh yes, the soul group is the players, but the guiding mind isn't. Or but the mind of the playwright guiding your alchemical journey. That's a very good comment, Alan. Thank you. So Alan says the soul group is the players, but the guiding mind isn't the fairy king or fairy queen or duke, but the mind of the playwright guiding your alchemic journey. Excellent, very nice. Okay, well, perfect. So what collectively guides the alchemic journey? Oh, Terry switched. That was Terry typing in for you. Yeah. So Terry switched roles with Alan there. That was a little phase conjugate relationship too. Anywho, so one of the techniques suggested for this ability to form the lucid dreaming team. This is another, when you get the right sports team together, it's called the dream team. Well, this is the dream team, really. The dream team is formed. The wisdom about how to do that. You suddenly recognize that you need practice in order to go through death successfully, which obviously is to lucid dream successfully. And to get the electrical inertia to do that, to gather the kind of momentum which eventually will steer planets and stars centripetally, you would do that as a group, a soul group. Carry Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun, as it were. And so, the classic, almost cliche instructions for forming that soul group were, you have your really intimate spiritual friends group, and you gather together regularly. And first, you do your meditation, your yoga together, and then you do your dinner together, and then you do your stories together. But one of the key things you do as a group, actually, is over time, gradually, you listen to each other's stories together, particularly the turning points in their lives, parts of those stories, to such an extent that it is said that the real proof that you formed your soul group is that you have wept for each other's stories. Now, what that means is that you've suddenly fused your emotions. You've done the alchemical fusion where you can feel them as another you. And at that point, after you've wept for each other's stories, you're beginning to extend your feeling, your aura, your plasma body to embed ability, perfecting compassion, in such a way that you can feel them inside as if they were outside, which is the physics of compassion, perfected compression, and embeddability. So, what was this Shakespeare play? Exactly. If you felt their highs and their lows, each of them individually, in the right timing in space, in the right geometry or symmetry in space, pairs of opposites, you set up the conditions to enable an experience that suddenly the plasma became centripetal and fusion was possible. Instead of unconsciously thinking, oh, I am not that person. No, I am not that person. This person in the play that's telling me about this fight, and this anger and the trivial emotions on the stage. At the beginning of the play, you're thinking, oh, I'm not any of these people. But at the end of the play, you're recognizing that my feelings are precisely at one time or another all of these people. And once you identify, which is to make a dent by phi ratio to identify, you identify with or implode or embed or phase lock, then suddenly the collective plasma body can become collectively centripetal, and you can have a oneness or non-destructive compression plasma fusion experience. The true meaning of alchemy in Shakespeare. Yes, thank you, Alan. The substance, Alan is commenting, this is what's called the substance of we feeling. And this is a particular series of books by Doris Lessing in the Sufi tradition that, it was said that if you enter a home in which love does exist, the air is physically syrupy because of the presence of the substance of we feeling. You actually, there are two Alan. Okay, there's two. That's right, because it's Alan and Teresa. So we have Alan and Teresa. So this idea that you physically create a softness electrically in the air when there's love presence in a house or on a Shakespeare stage, which allows the possibility of people to feel each other and get centripetal and feel from the heart and that sort of thing. So you see what this metaphor was about, that the true meaning of alchemy in Shakespeare's plays, was setting up the electric symmetry conditions necessary to allow plasma fusion, centripetal force among auras, to create the possibility of the oneness experience. And Jilsa is talking about, in the dream time as a shamanic term, who work in lucid dreaming for the descendants. Yes, that actually, that's very good. I like that concept of dreaming for the descendants or the children of tomorrow, that actually what constitutes a centripetal plasma field genetically is those who can feel for racial or collective memory and thus serve long-term survival, literally pure intention. So at the center of bliss experience, at the center of plasma fusion experience, is the pure physics of charge symmetry that enables you to inhabit the center of that lightning bolt, sometimes called Kundalini or bliss, or the movie Powder. That to inhabit the center of that lightning bolt, where charge density exists at that level in the DNA and in your spine, it is said you can only think pure intention. You can only think a shareable thought. You can only think pure physics or pure principle. What that means is if you have a thought which is unprocessed, undigested, or angry, or not shareable, or not pure principle, you will generate heat. And that, when you're existing at the center of a lightning bolt called Kundalini or bliss, will be destructive, which would be actually fatal. So learning to think more and more about only ideas which serve the collective, pure principle, enables you to enter racial memory, which is to say the library of survival information, the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, which serves all of collective DNA's survival, pure principle. And if you're dwelling on the physics of pure principle, pure intention, pure physics, pure wave mechanics, pure essence, then you can stay in the middle of that lightning bolt and consider exactly what charge density at that level in the core of DNA and the core of Kundalini, the Holy Grail as it were. And then the Kundalini doesn't toast your nadis. Remember that Gopi Krishna and Krishnamurti were crybabies. They're saying, this Kundalini is killing me, it's killing me. They didn't understand the physics of what it took to get to the center of that lightning bolt. Whereas when you're able to dwell on the issues that affect the survival of all of DNA, then at that moment, the charge of all of DNA is conjugate implosively attracted to you, and your hair stands up. You've thought about pure principle essence. You have the eureka, the lightning, the bliss, the ecstatic moment. And that charge implosion is essentially the essence of dwelling on the physics of pure principle, which exists at the center of alchemy. Thank you, just goosebumps. Yes, you haven't met. Yeah, Vincent Bridges. Many of his articles here are at fractalfield.com/alchemy. I'll put that link. And the other back, yes, at fractalfield.com/alchemy. And the main article for this evening's conversation has a review of those Vincent Bridges films, in which he goes through many of these things. fractalfield.com/alchemy of fusion, which is an article which will eventually be evolving into a book and a film and a screenplay as Teresa and I and Ellen work on these things, and to put this all together into a compelling literature piece. Another note we wanted to make here about this, the science of alchemy and the science of implosion, as it had to do with the plasma dynamics of aura, was to think about how it is that the physics of Kundalini and Tantra are identical as plasma fusion with the physics of the alchemy of emotion in Shakespeare's theater. One thing to comment is just to note that if you look at the article goldenmean.info/touch, you see the wave geometrics. I should have put in this slideshow, but I didn't quite get my show together. But you see the wave geometrics of emotion. specifically in Manfred Klein's Centric work in the psychophysics of music. By specific experimentation with a pressure transducer, he documents that the way you touch someone when you feel love is a wave shape, a change in pressure over time, which reaches a delayed tantric maximum only 0.618 into the duration of the event, golden ratio. Whereas if you touch someone, squeeze their arm, for example, to say joy instead of love, the point of max pressure will occur much sooner at 1/6 into the duration of that pressure wave in the physics of music. For example, you're learning to touch a violin string in a way to make people cry as a violinist, which is how Manfred Klein's learned how to do this as a world-leading violinist. So, averaging these touch events over time to discriminate between joy, pride, awe, anger, pity, fear, we see that the wave shape for emotions are explicit and replicable across all of cultures, primitive cultures to advanced cultures. If you touch someone to say, I'm angry with you, your max pressure in that squeeze is going to be 1/7 into the duration of that touch. Max destructive wave interference. Whereas if you're touching someone to say, I'm joyful now, it would be 1/6. And if you're touching someone to say, I love you, when you squeeze them, in fact, what will happen is you will squeeze them in such a way that the point of maximum pressure in the duration of your hug will arrive tantrically delayed until 0.618 into the duration of that love hug. And that will set up a constructive interference phenomenon, which looks like a Valentine, which is implosive, which is why you can ask your experimental huggy at the end of your experimental love hug as the correct test question. You say, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? This is a speed dating 101 course. No, I'm sorry. This is a physics of emotion course. But it's true that if you squeeze someone correctly to say, I love you in your squeeze, whether it's a squeeze of the hand or hugging their body or tantra, in fact, the love hug will have a pressure geometry exactly like a perfect birth canal, where the point of max pressure is delayed tantrically until 0.618. Almost 2/3 of the way through the event of that squeezing process. And that sets up a heterodyne recursive constructive interference phenomena called golden ratio implosion, which is the physics of love, long wave, phi ratio, low phi. So now we have a wave mechanics emotional cookbook to set up opposing emotions intelligently so the wave mechanics can create centripetal force, implosion, and the possibility of fusion. Yeah, actually, Dan, in terms of your question, I think the owners of the record label were aware of the actual effects of certain emotional triggers would have? I think I would refer that question to Akashic Records. It's a company I visited outside of Boulder. No, how I would refer that question. The example that's given in the book Centics by Manfred Klein's, I think, is illustrative. That if you look at the geometry of the sculpture of the Pieta and the folds of the dress of the mother weeping over her dead son, you see precisely the wave geometry of grief. I repeat, in the Pieta, Manfred Klein claims that the sculpting of the dress of the weeping mother is the centric wave geometry for grief. Do you see what's unconsciously accomplished there in sculpture, where the raiment, the 7-color Technicolor coat, the braid, the garment of light, has embedded in it the waveform shape for that emotion of that moment, which was grief. So the sculpture is unconsciously aware of the wave shape for grief as documented in the physics of emotion. And that is precisely what is in Michelangelo's Pieta. So there's an example that the wave shape, the sculpture for emotion, is explicit identified in physics and can be used to create architecture as wave shape. So, to finish this section of the course was just to make a final point that Tantra and Kundalini are, in fact, quite literally the possible physics of plasma fusion, namely that for one person's aura to embed non-destructively in another's, to generate the possible centripetal force, which is the necessary physics of Tantra, is for that phase lock to allow the two opposing plasma cocoons, your aura and that of your lover, to embed non-destructively. Interestingly, our heart tuner, which is now iThrive.com, earlier heartspring.com, our biofeedback system, the heart tuner, my invention, Heart Coherence, was originally used by William Golan, the founder of Yoga Journal, for his Tantra school at Topanga Canyon, Los Angeles, California. So the reason you use EKG phase lock, my original invention was called heartslink.com, later heartsring.com, for that reason, because to teach hearts to phase lock enables the micromotion entrainment that enables plasma fusion, which is the physics of Tantra. So in that sense, Tantra and Kundalini are parallel in the sense that they're the enabling two persons' aura to become collectively centripetal and thus steer a bigger tornado. And there is a definite music to that, which begins with what in Bentoff, measurements of the physics of Kundalini and stalking the wild pendulum, and we have several of our courses about that here. He called that the capacitive accelerometry of micromotion entrainment. In other words, all of the long wave frequencies of both bodies entrain. The potential exists to do that with Therapy.net plasma as well. Whereas in kinesiology, that's also called micromotion entrainment, that you can tell if their bodies are leaning to their head goes, if everyone's head goes this way at the same time, you know everyone in the room is thinking the same thing. And if their body motions kind of synchronize together, just like grandfather clocks in a room, this is called long wave micromotion entrainment, and it enables a group of people in a room to phase lock as one waveform, again like the grandfather clock's pendulum in a room. And that's precisely what's happening in Shakespearean theater as well. You know, at the critical moments, hopefully everyone is nodding, oh, I get it, at just the same moment, and suddenly the whole theater is doing the same movements, and that creates alchemy, centripetal force, plasma fusion, collective oneness experience. And the psychodynamic required for Tantra and Kundalini is the same as the alchemy of Shakespearean theater, which is that everyone has to be thinking, oh, I feel for everyone here. If everyone is thinking, oh, I'm angry with everybody here, or I don't like that person, if you're thinking about all the people you don't like in the room, then there's no chance for a oneness experience. However, if while at the beginning of the play you were thinking, well, I don't like that one, and I don't like that one, and I don't like that one, but by the end of the play you're thinking, oh, I kind of feel for what they were going through and what they were going through, and suddenly that's the beginning of empathy, embedding, entrainment, and oneness, and plasma fusion. And that centripetal force, called alchemy, has a very specific symmetry recipe, hypercube physics, the cube octa, and setting up the conditions for the cube to embed the dodeca to create that implosion. And that's why alchemy in Shakespeare is real, because it has the symmetry physics present. Okay, now the other thing we should do here is just, there are 3 PDFs for tonight's presentation, and I see it's after 9 already, we're over halfway done, was just to see if we actually use the pictures. So this was the hypercubic design of Shakespearean theater, sequences of opposing emotions, sets of the conditions. Oh yes, and this picture here was just, and most of you have seen this before, just that the symmetry of what in this case is supposedly the original magnetic map of Prague is in fact quite literally a rose if you make the magnetic lines. And by the way, Valerie and I sort of did find that lucid dreaming worked a little better in Prague. When you're near the center, you can actually feel this. And this is where John D. and Kelly are doing these workings, and that's why we're speaking of it here, because After John Dee told Queen Elizabeth a year ahead of time he's going to cook up this storm to take out this here armada, later called the Tempest, he went to this map here. These are the 7 sacred sites around mystic Prague. And we show some of the pictures here. There's Praha Mystica. We actually met Mesto here, who wrote the book on Mystic Prague based on this 7-5 star map of the original symmetry map for Prague. And there's the names of the places in Prague that form this heptagram. And there's 2 of them, and here's 5 more. Hopefully, I guess I missed some of them here. So there's 7, and 7 hills, as it were, 7 hills of Rome and 7 hills of Prague. Now, supposedly, after John Dee told Queen Elizabeth, "Yep, I'm going to cook up the storm, all right," he goes back and does what's called a heptagonal working in Prague, and he uses what he's learned about the Ophanim Enochian. Now, remember, Ophanim Enochian is another name for very large plasma beings. Angels, as it were, interstellar plasma beings, who, if we are to listen to our teachers, they tell us that these very large plasma beings, gnomes, elementals, undines, and on a larger scale, Ophanim, these plasma beings consider us humans drunk and stupid because we don't talk to them, because they know that our ecosystem will always be in chaos until we do. In other words, we are to expect storms that are out of control, normal biofeedback, until we learn that we must communicate intelligently with the large-scale plasma, which are these big tornadoes. Hello, America. You think you're having too many storms that are out of control? I have a suggestion for you, which is to learn how to speak to very large plasma beings. And I will say to you emphatically, and this is not rolling thunder tickling the belly of the black beetle or the scarab calling the storms. I will say to you that after I realized that Kundalini called storms, and then after I did Ophanim ritual with Vincent Bridges on several continents, I saw storms the size of continents being called multiple times myself personally. I know what it is to do that. It is not a miracle. It is simply the intelligence to relate to very large plasma beings. And that intelligence is a symmetry intelligence. And the symmetry index of that, one fine example, is Ophanim Enochian. So I am saying to you that if you would like to have your climate and your atmosphere emerge from chaos, that it is very necessary to learn to communicate with very large plasma beings, like John Dee here did with the heptagonal workings. So that gives more context then to seeing why, for example, in this supposed part of this tablet of Malvage here, you have this, let's see if I can bring this in. If you take the English letter for the Ophanim letters in the table and read down, you have Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, Gabriel, and Mikael. So the names of angels are actually a sequence of symmetry operations to enable the centripetal force where their name and their shape and their service are one. And the process of learning how to call very large plasma beings is a process of learning a sequence of symmetry operations. Remember, these Ophanim letters are literally what was used to make the movie Stargate, hint, hint, implode plasma. And so this gives a little bit more context than to our discussion about how to make these donuts talk to each other on a very large scale. So this is the Ophanim Enochian sigil of truth. And you see here the 7 spins outside and the 5 spins inside, very much related to the Cherokee Arboretum, 7 arrows, and 7arrows.net and octayoga.com. All of that conversation, I'll put the link here, 7arrows.net and octayoga.com. We just had a lovely conversation today about doing the infinity walk, figure 8, cross crawl therapy for dyslexia, so well documented at Infinity Walk. So, which is turning inside out in the whole thing. So Alan says, so that used existing Hebraic angel magic. Vincent's observation was those that Hebrew names in the seal of Amet had to embed into something even larger, Ophanim Enochian. Very good. So Alan is saying, that you're actually embedding in a much larger world. And Alan is a specialist in the detailed mechanics of this Ophanim Enochian workings. And Alan will be presenting an hour and a half, 2 hour course on this subject in a couple weeks, the week after, I believe, that Teresa. So next week we have more on the hard physics with Mark Rohrbauer in sort of the alchemy physics of Mark, the Nassim Haramein, and our physics on phase conjugate gravity, and the latest work in hard physics, solid physics. I don't mean hard in the sense of difficult. I mean hard in the sense of purely rigorous physics. So next week is physics with Mark Rohrbauer. And then I believe the week after that, if I remember correctly, is Teresa and Terry Burns will be talking then about the historical story in much more detail, and she'll review the dates and names and places in literature, and historians should enjoy the detail, and that will later then become part of the manuscript. And then I believe it's the week after that Alan will be presenting, Alan Moore will be presenting later, and you can see this all at fractalu.com in the actual practical, hands-on practice of Ophanim Enochian ritual. And I've been with Alan both in Torino and here in South France, doing very effective and powerful ritual, Terry and Alan. And so that is coming up in a few weeks, and we'll have more time to go through that. And so Alan here is speaking about the Ophanic item, the tables, the seals, the lamen, the holy table, and he will explain to you in some detail how this was done. And although I'm, reasonably knowledgeable about the theory, and I have had lots of fun at powerful rituals, when it comes to the actual mechanics of setting up these rituals, I much admire Alan's skill in that regard. So that is, as it were, coming soon to a theater near you at fractalu.com with Terry and Alan. Joseph says, so in terms of the 8 octa, is that the concept of Prometheus, Berry's atomic chakra? Gurdjieff mentioned it too. I can't remember calling. Interesting. Gurdjieff mentioned it. I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, but the Octa Yoga, the perfect trefoil, is an example of carrying out these symmetry operations in your Dantian, and therefore creating proprioception and balance, the end of dyslexia and centripetal force. So the kinesthetic of doing all this is there at octayoga.com. Relating it to the concept of Prometheus is interesting. And in terms of atomic chakras, well, actually, Jilsa, I don't know about atomic chakras, but I know that the next part of tonight's course is moving now toward the science, and the next part of tonight's course, and I'm switching PDFs now, to alchemyatomicscourse.pdf. So our graphics are going to change right now at this moment. And we're moving toward a science summary, which is sort of the conclusion of tonight's conversation. So now, our context is alchemic, implosive, charge, plasma fusion, centripetal force for charge, centripetal force for waves of charge, is the physics of alchemy, is the physics of isotope transitions, is the physics of plasma fusion, and is the physics of human and biologic oneness experience. Now, in that context, moving this more now towards science, we're looking at how we would evaluate this, for example, as a chemist, eventually moving toward the subject of cold fusion. So from a chemical perspective, what are we saying? Remember, the word chem and the word alchemy derive from the ancient word I will raise a Shem, or Shem, unto the Lord. And we now know that Shem means literally access to a black hole. It originally was translated, I will make an altar in the church. That's what the word Shem was translated to mean, as in schem and schematic and matrix. But later we now know that what the altar was the church was an electric capacitor enabled to make a black hole and thus a bioactive field. Hence, access to the black hole becomes literally the definition of the word chem as in alchemy and chemistry. So something, the subtitle of this section of tonight's course is called What Your Chemistry Teacher Desperately Needed to Tell You But Didn't. That's the subtitle of this part of tonight's little fun. So now that we know what the word chem is in chemistry and alchemy means, which is how to make a wave matrix a schematic, which enables access to a black hole implosion or alchemy. We now need to apply that black hole making symmetry recipe to the physics of the atomic table, which again, in terms of things your chemistry teacher desperately needed to tell you and forgot. So here is the background for this part of tonight's course, and this PDF is the article goldenmean.info/creation, which has these pictures you're about to see. And it's from 21st Century Magazine and Lawrence Hecht, all these excellent articles on pure Platonic symmetry in nuclear and electron geometry. In other words, remember, I wrote a new equation that proved that the electron radii of hydrogen were pure golden ratio to Planck at center, to Planck time and length. So you multiply Planck time and length times golden ratio, you get pure spirals, and you get hydrogen radii. So golden ratio is all over hydrogen geometry. Now, applying that, we see a couple of things. Your chemistry teacher, if she or he had explained to you more accurately how the nesting of the Platonic solids, hint, star mother kit, tetra, octacube, dodecacosa, the nesting of the Platonic solids, and specifically, I do mean the way the little ones nest in the big ones. The tetracube cannot get into the dodeca without making golden ratio. Very important point here. So suddenly here we have, first we're going to look at the electron shells, and then we're going to look at the nucleus. And in both cases, we're going to find, alchemically, tetracube inside and dodecacosa on the outside. Hello. So here we are with the electron shells. This is the reason it's important to look at this is because if you can visualize what the waves in the atoms are doing accurately, then you can make those operations inside your IMOG imagination. And therefore, just like the students in the Steiner course fill the room with the smell of roses when they visualize roses accurately enough, and that's the test, by the way. If the room didn't fill with the smell of roses, you haven't finished your visualization exercise of roses. The Flowering Brain 101 from Steiner School. So if you can visualize accurately and flower the atomic table inside your head, then the creation mechanics are inside your body. Isn't that cool? And that means you no longer have to imagine that God is outside you. In fact, God is inside you. I mean the divine, perfectly branched creation mechanics, the self-empowering end to miracle worship and personality worship, and replacement with the spiritual physics, which is behind all real spirituality. So it's very important that you be able to visualize these things accurately. So in your chemistry class, your chemistry teacher accurately told you that the entire atomic table is made of one simple set of nests. That you just take what's called the s, p, d, and f electron suborbital, and then you interdigitate and recursively nest s, p, d, and f suborbital, and you then have the entire atomic table. Ain't it cool? So what is the s and p, d, and f suborbital as a wave geometry? Well, it's quite obvious, actually. The s suborbital right here, this is the latest physics on what the s suborbital looks like right here. A donut with a vortex coming and going. Pine cones kissing noses. So the s suborbital is simple. That's a donut. Now, in a donut, you have two vortexes. That's called two electrons. Pretty simple. S suborbital, donut, two electrons. We're done. Okay, next. The p, or pi suborbital. Now, it's been well documented in science. The pi suborbital is here. I don't know, bring this up. I want to get this labeled correctly. This is the pi. Well, first, I want to say, here, this is the s suborbital physics here, and this is the s suborbital as it was seen in occult chemistry clairvoyantly before physics ever knew. Isn't that cool? Now, here is the p, the pi suborbital, seen in occult chemistry. Cubic, pretty cool. The clairvoyants got it before the physicists did. And here's the pi suborbital in modern physics. It's a cube. Okay, So you got 3 pairs of opposite vortex. So 3 pairs of opposite vortex equals 6 vortex, 6 electrons. Okay, pi suborbital, pure cube. 3 pairs of opposite vortex, 6 electrons. SP. So it's 1 donut, 2 vortex is S, 2 electron. 3 donuts, 6 vortex, 6 electrons. That's P. So this is all pretty simple. Okay, so the DF suborbital is 5 and 10 electrons, 10 and 14 vortex. And guess what that is? Dodecaecosa. It's obvious. In fact, Armand Weiler wrote a whole paper on how the 7 axes of symmetry is the icosahedron versus the 5 real axes and 2 pseudo axes. You can read all about it in Armand Weiler. Point is, the D and F suborbital are dodecaecosahedron. And if you finish the dodecaecosahedron around the tetracube, you get this. Okay, so now we've finished doing all of the electrons in the whole atomic table, SPDF, and what do we have? Donut, tetracube, and dodecaecosa. Okay, 1, 3, 4, 5, 7. Vortex pairs is 2, 6, 10, 14 electrons. We're done. We did the atomic table in electrons. Finish. Move on to the nucleus. Click. Okay, here is, I got a better picture of the nucleus here. The nuclear geometries. Oh, my nuclear geometry picture. Bear with me one moment. Right. So here is this displayed as an interference pattern from cymatics, which gives you the flavor of cubic versus dodecaecosa as a cymatic wave interference pattern. Basically, a constructive wave interference pattern. Obviously, that's what matter is, but to visualize it accurately. So yes, now here is the atomic table electron valence symmetry arranged by Platonic solid from the book Occult Chemistry. And you see you have the tetrahedron group, the cube group, the octahedron group, and the bars and stars group are dodecaecosa. So that just shows that the history of seeing this table. But now I wanted to show one more picture here. Oh yes, okay, so here is another picture of 1 donut, tetracube, and dodecaecosa as the way the atomic table was seen in occult chemistry clairvoyantly. Remember that later occult chemistry, clairvoyance, visions of subatomic physics was later justified in modern quantum physics in the book Psi Perception of Quarks by Phillips. So there's a lot of data there showing that these clairvoyants were seeing something real. Here is their pictures of how the wave mechanics works long before the physicists knew it. You clairvoyants, you have a powerful role to play. Ah yes, here's the one I was looking for. Good. Okay. Remember, we had just finished showing that this nest, tetracube inside dodecaecosa, is the geometry of the electrons. Now we're moving on to the nucleus. And here is from the article, 21st, I'm zooming in here, I'm having fun with my little gadget. In 21st Century Magazine, the geometry of the nucleus. This is the very famous chemist at the University of Chicago, Moon, and he's taken, here he has taken the entire atomic table, and he's looking at the arrangement of the nuclear hadrons in the protons and the neutrons in the nucleus. And he's looked at the nuclear geometry, the nucleus in the atomic table, and the way the protons and the protons and the neutrons are nested inside the nucleus. And he says that this geometry is, for these atoms, tetra and cubic, and then these atoms, it's octa, and for these atoms, it's icosahedron. Remember, the icosahedron is a dual of the dodeca, so icosa symmetry is the wave dimensions of dodeca. So again, you have tetra, octa, cube, dodecaecosa. Here is the geometry of the nucleus. Oh, the inside looks like the outside. Self-similarity is sometimes called fractality. Oh, does that mean that the nucleus is fractal to the electrons? Oh, maybe your chemistry teacher should have told you that. Now, when something inside is self-similar to what's outside, that fractality creates a centripetal force named The gravity. So how do atoms make gravity? Because the inside is self-similar or fractal to the outside. The nucleus is fractal to the electrons. That implosive, non-destructive, alchemic collapse is the cause of the centripetal force called gravity. And so now, if your chemistry teacher had told you that the nucleus is fractal to the electrons, then you might have learned something Einstein and Stephen Hawking never learned, which is why an object falls to the ground. Wasn't this fun? Okay, so at any rate, you can look at all the references to this at that web article. You can see how important this is. I redrew some of these pictures here. This was my redrawing of SPDF suborbitals. So here is, I'm talking about the electron orbitals here and comparing it to the nuclear geometries here. But the highest res picture here from Moon's work, University of Chicago, showing the geometry of the nucleus is here. So truly, the nuclear geometries is tetracube octacosa, and the electrons are self-similar and fractal, and therefore implosive. Now, this is really not new information to somebody who studies symmetry group theory. A group theory and symmetry study is basically the same thing. However, looking at it this way in terms of platonics, using that kind of language enables us to see something which was missed before, which is specifically that it is the self-similarity of the inside nucleus to the outside electron shells, which enables the implosive alchemic non-destructive collapse, which is to say fusion energy, centripetal force generated, which explains how atoms are making gravity. And why atoms makes gravity is a mystery that until me has never been answered in physics. I mean, physics should be candid. I think Maurice Cotterell coined the phrase very well. He said, well, these physicists are pretty arrogant for a group of people that don't have a clue why an object falls to the ground. I mean, they're pretty arrogant. I would never say that I know more than Einstein, for example. Einstein made amazing, powerful mathematic contributions and predictions, piezoelectric force, photoelectric force. I mean, this is wonderful, wonderful work. But Einstein was clear. He did not know why an object falls to the ground. He never figured out the cause of gravity. And he even said, I believe, that if he understood infinite non-destructive compression, he would have had the unified field. And no one ever told him what a fractal was, which is specifically infinite non-destructive compression. Mathematicians know that fractality is infinite compression, but it never even occurred to them to ask what a fractal electric field is. Now, I say to you, my new equation, integer exponents of golden ratio times Planck length and time, proving the new way to understand the radii of hydrogen, is proof that hydrogen is precisely fractal, which is to say self-similar, and that is the reason hydrogen makes gravity. Now that's new information, and that answers Einstein's question, which is, what is infinite non-destructive compression? Mathematicians know what infinite compression is, they call it fractality, but they don't know what a fractal field is until they discovered the actual physics, wave mechanics, the geometry of hydrogen, golden ratio, etc., etc. Cool. Okay. Plasmas often sound reactive. Oh yes, digital signal processor. Question, Dan, considering cymatics, two-image waveform, an ultrasonic plasma view of a 3D structure. Yes, I think a plasma view of a 3D structure is, I mean, plasma is basically a cloud of charge, and an electron is a cloud of charge. So in a way, we're saying, obviously, if plasma is a cloud of charge that kind of got set free, then condensed plasma is precisely what an electron is, and further condensed plasma or charge is called mass. And the inertia stored by plasma or charge as a wave is the definition of mass, which is to say rotation is the origin of both mass and time, because charge rotates, stores inertia gyroscopically, and that is our only definition for mass. And charge rotates, creates a period, which is our only definition for time. So if charge didn't rotate, we wouldn't have mass or time. And charge can't rotate centripetally without being phase conjugate or fractal, which is to say make centripetal force. Otherwise, there would only be chaos. And you can only emerge from chaos, hint, hint, to planets that are going into chaos by get fractal or get dead, which is say conjugate. Okay, so now I see that it's 9:32. we have a certain amount of fun. We have a last part, which is the science lesson of cold fusion. But first, a quick look at the chat window. Vincent spoke of Dee's crystal ball in one of your videos on the Alchemy of Fusion site, for which the dude left Dee's employee. Yes, actually, John Dee's crystal ball, the show stone, and Terry, I'm sure, is going to talk about the history of that a bit too. What we believe was a phase conjugate crystal that enabled scrying. Now, scrying basically allows your visual focus to phase conjugate, and that creates the superluminal longitudinal component called time reversal or time travel, or simply ability to move in and out of time. If you go faster than light, you can certainly move in and out of time. So if the phase conjugate or high dielectric material in Dee's crystal ball enabled conjugation, then if you have the skill to focus there, you can actually project your attention remotely at a distance, which is called phase conjugate interferometry, physics of microwave plasma containment, and all kinds of fun stuff. So, John Dee's crystal ball is related to, Enki's gear coup and fire crystal and Tuoi stone and all that fun stuff. And the fact that Kelly was the one who had the discipline to look in that crystal ball, in the show stone, into the sphere, which you can see in the British Museum, was something which caused a lot of fighting between Dee and Kelly in competition. And indeed, even in this life, between Vincent and myself, there were times of competition, and it's quite a colorful story. In fact, actually, in terms of a screenplay that would make a lovely, lovely movie, would be the story of Vincent Bridges, actually here, and sadly, we should say that on the morning that Vincent Bridges' new play about the karma of Kelly was to be presented in Prague was the morning that Vincent Bridges died. And the story about that and how he was dealing with the ghosts in Kelly's tower where he was living, where Kelly is a hero of Prague, is a story that's very intense and probably more colorful than most of Shakespeare. Thank you, The Donkey in the Cradle, which was the name of Kelly's abode, The Donkey in the Cradle, and the title of the film. And it's the metaphor for why it was called that. In fact, perhaps Terry Burns and Alan will speak of that in their courses coming up. But just to say that, we could review where that karma came from. But I think we're going to leave that for those next courses. But just to comment about the nature of karma in general, which is to say that the feeling of guilt for having wounded someone in the past, naming that karma from the point of view of physics is interesting because, in effect, at the moment of clear perception, which is identical with the moment of bliss or fusion, and even more identical with the moment of Kundalini or the moment of death, that the actual moment of clear perception required for successful death is precisely achieving implosive charge compression. What that means is, you know how you prepare to die by assembling all of your memory, and if there's anyone you're angry at or any memory that isn't sorted, in other words, if there's any emotion inside you that could not be usefully shared with all DNA, you need to sort that before you can die successfully, because that moment of compression, called successful birth or successful death, is a time when all biologic plasma necessarily needs to implosively converge. For example, it is now well proven that the clinical experience of death, the near-death experience, is electrically contagious. So medical surgeons standing over dying people have proven that seeing the wormhole of the death experience is contagious in a hospital setting, that other people standing nearby are going to see that implosive wormhole. So we know that death experience, it creates a plasma vortex wormhole, which is electrically contagious. Medical science has proven this. So what happens at death experience and birth experience, which is why birth should be blissful, is that all biological plasma has to share its waves to a point of convergence, to the point of perfect sharing, so that memory can come through. And that ain't going to happen unless, in other words, you can't go in there angry and expect success. It don't work. The reason it doesn't work is because perfect peaceful agreement with all of waves, all of memory, identifying with the needs of the collective, pure principle, whatever you want to call it, pure intention, is precisely what enables you to do that compression without electrical resistance, namely without heat. So remember, when you're having Kundalini or you're being the hero in the movie Powder, inhabiting a lightning bolt, you're going to need to do it in such a way that you are a perfectly shareable wave. Getting your symmetry operations to that point is the physics of immortality. We even document that at goldenmean.info/immortality, putting the link here with the Clouvet form constants, which is specifically what you see at the moment of death, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, which are DNA doing the implosion operations to get to the point of implosive charge, which is how you get to compress all of your life's memory into one place. The perfect squeeze, identical to rebirthing and birth, and the very essence of the nature of death is perfect squeezing. So to get through that wormhole, which is why your whole life has to pass by through that in that split second, it's perfect compression. And perfect compression we know has physics, which is how DNA braids, and that's what the Clouvet form constants are. And it is proven that that's the symmetry map of what people see when they die. So, what is karma? Karma is biology's solution to symmetry. Valerie gives this example that this guy was cutting fish for most of his life. And before he died, he had to have this experience of what it felt like to be a fish in pain and actually pay his debt to all these dead fish. Well, what is karma? That was symmetry. The reason is because if you felt angry at anyone, you considered them to be not yourself instead of considering them to be yourself. I am another you, as it were. And so anyone that you have been exceptionally angry at, you would need to relive it through their perspective so that you can identify with the collective, which is, say, to distill all life's principles to pure principle, which is the same thing with, before you close your eyes at night, reprocessing your day, play the movie backwards. Can you do it without interrupting? Means you've taken all the emotion and distilled it to pure principle, learned the pure principle essence of every experience, and there's no remaining attachments, and now you're free to distribute charge, called Hey Ave, or heaven, or perfected charge distribution, which is where your aura needs to go at death, which is why your graveyard must look like a rose, as the Hopis well knew. So all I'm saying here is the alchemic lesson of what karma is, which is the restoration of symmetry, enabling you to identify with the whole. It is to recognize that karma isn't some arbitrary law of spiritual masters. No, that's crap. Karma is simply the necessary operation of restoring charge symmetry so that you can feel all of what's outside as if it was inside. So obviously, if someone wounded you and they were simply misunderstanding everything, then you don't have to carry any anger about it because you see what their perspective was and you restore the symmetry. Whereas if you've caused harm to lots of people, you're going to need to feel that in order to restore the symmetry. So restoring karma is simply the restoration of symmetry. Okay, now we're running out of time here, and we had promised one last... I just wanted to show you. This is just an introduction. This is from the film series Metals Morphosis. And this is from Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth Donovan, writing on his series of new equations to prove that he could predict the frequency and temperature to catalyze virtually every commercially useful isotope transition in the atomic table. Now this is alchemy. Just to give you, so He has predicted a frequent, remember that there's a guy named Joe Champion who predicted the temperature to catalyze isotope transitions to physics. But Bill was the first to, Elizabeth, to predict both the frequency and the temperature to catalyze isotope transitions, which is to say to trigger non-destructive implosive charge collapse. And he listed some, for example, here, the scope of the experiments that he predicted how to change iron to chromium, aluminum to silver. Lithium to germanium. So every single isotope transition in the atomic table, we can predict how to do that alchemy, that implosive charge collapse, with a new series of equations. And we have a group, this is from fractalfield.com/isotope transitions. Okay, and we have our research people are in the process of proving this work. Now, Bill Elizabeth started this by analyzing Rossi's problems in his cold fusion work, which is to say the isotope sequence from nickel to copper. And he showed in several meetings with Rossi, with Roger Green's help, that in fact Rossi probably did not accurately model the exact sequence of correct isotope transitions between nickel and copper, and showed that if he had more properly modeled that, he would have sorted his nickel isotopes before beginning the cold fusion thermal operations. And if he had sorted his nickel isotopes, he would have achieved ability to regulate, which clearly is the problem now faced by the lawsuit between Rossi and Industrial Heat. So this is just an example of, if you have the equations to predict isotope transitions, the real physics of charge collapse, fusion, K-shell collapse, etc., then you can understand cold fusion precisely. Cold fusion is a name for the implosion caused by alchemy, phase conjugation. So, just to suggest that this work goes to the level of cutting-edge physics, we show just an example excerpt from one of the key pages of Bill Donovan's Elizabeth spreadsheet here, in which he predicts the critical frequencies and temperatures for the charge collapse, the sequence between nickel 58 and copper 59, and nickel 59 and so between nickel and copper and cobalt here. So the point is that the equations that are associated with this spreadsheet, which are not shown here, phonon resonance, etc., enables us to set up very precise conditions to actually enable alchemy to be possible. Now, when Kelly aka Vincent said that you take a little bit of the ground up red powder, projective powder, philosopher's stone, which he intimated in part was originally the Kaaba stone of the Muslims, Lucifer's eye, a glass meteorite with vaporized gold, making the vaporized glass foam sandwich geometry a conjugator, because the atomic gold vaporized through the molten glass into the glass foam exactly the way the Templars used vaporized gold to make the red purple glass in the stained glass windows. Transformative, made the glass meteorite a broad spectral electrical phase conjugator, in the sense that the conjugate quality of the monatomic gold in the gold vapor propagated through the glass at the macromolecular geometry, made the foam long wave molecular geometry of the glass self-similar or conjugate to the wavelengths in the cold plasma monatomic gold in the gold vapor through the glass. So you got this beautiful sandwich, philosopher's stone, Nicholas Flamel, and you grind up a little bit of that, and this is the philosopher's stone, the projective powder, which was called the red powder in Kelly and Dee's day, and a little bit of that powder in dipped in wax, about the size of a grain of rice, was splashed down there in the red hot mercury. And then if the cooling geometry was right, then this was Vincent's introduction to how Dee and Kelly were documented to have made the purest gold ever measured by the British Royal Society, so much so that Queen Elizabeth had to dispatch her most expensive spy, Shakespeare, under the name Francis Garland, into John Dee's notebook in Prague, because she sent the spy over there because whoever was making that gold was obviously going to rule the world, and she didn't want Rudolph to be ahead of her, and that's why she sent the expensive spy Shakespeare, Francis Garland, to Dee's lab. After they proved that they had made gold, they sent the cup back to UK. So what our equations now show is that this alchemic process by which the mercury, remember mercury has only one electron difference and no nuclear difference to gold, so it's a very simple charge collapse operation. But what we now know is that the stability of the macromolecular conditions to enable that cooling process of the red hot mercury into gold required a phonon geometry, that the tower in which they were doing this existed in a pentagonal nest, and there's an element of phonon array, which is the sound, and I suggest to you the movie Chain Reaction. Okay, so he's got this, his music suddenly disguised a critical sound to enable the fusion to take place. Do you get what I'm saying here? So I'm suggesting to you that there's a whole new level of the physics of alchemy which is enabled by this conversation, and it's real. It's not just poetic or metaphoric. It's powerful. We have people that are working on this, and we can work together. And of course, governments fall over when people discover. Well, okay, the question was the Tower the Bell? Actually, I think Terry knows what tower they were in. I think that's where Terry encountered Kelly's other ghost. It's interesting. Terry said Kelly had a happy ghost out in the country where they did that alchemy work, but that Kelly's ghost in Kelly's tower in Prague was so angry that many people say that that's related to how Vincent actually came to die, dealing with his own ghost, as it were. It's quite a story of recursion. Messy, very complicated. At any rate, but the metaphor here, we know that Nostradamus's tower was in a very large pentagram. We have a drawing of that from Vincent, and we suspect that Kelly and Dee's tower, in which they did the actual successful alchemy, was in the middle of a magnetic pentagram as well. And we also suspect that there was a critical phonon geometry, literally a sound wave through the liquid required for the alchemy, as we strongly suspect that a phonon geometry, literally a frequency, is critical to the Rossi work and the Defcalian work in fusion as well. So, yes, some good ghost stories. So Terry and Ellen have promised to share more of these ghost stories. And Joseph commented, plasma gasification does the opposite, breaks down. Plasma is more efficient than landfill and direct. Yes, plasma gasification is related to, for example, the Santilli work that takes implosive arc, high voltage arc, and implosively sorts polluted diesel and other hydrocarbon fuels and purifies polluted oil waste, for example. So a perfect arc, as in the Ark of the Covenant, or in Santilli's case of the Magna gas, the square wave harmonic component of the arc, high voltage arc, creates possibly implosive centripetal force. And a perfect arc is the metaphor for everything we're talking about tonight, including the Ark of the Covenant, because the arc is a square wave whose harmonic component could become infinite, recursive, phase conjugate, and centripetal if the arc is perfect. And this perfect square with the arc, in the sense of the Ark of the Covenant, we know is related to golden ratio. And the spark gap in the Ark of the Covenant between the gold angels on the roof of the Ark of the Covenant clearly was a phase conjugate field, because that's how they made the gold powder electrically stable, later called monoatomic gold, ormes, or the spice, which was in the biblical term Holy Communion, which is to say the mana would crystallize. So in the perfect electric geometry, the mana crystallizes because gold becomes stable as a monoatom in a phase conjugate implosive capacitance, which is why the Ark of the Covenant was the primary cash cow of the Essenes, because all the royal families all over the planet wanted to buy their gold powder, which was called Holy Communion, because it was immortalizing. Let's see. Dan says, interesting how Arcturus' star is an arc away from the last star in the Big Dipper. Yeah, the perfect spark gap is the metaphor for everything we talked about. And another fun story of the perfect spark gap is the carbon arc lamp that later enabled Tesla to master the reversible cold fusion reaction that powered the famous zero-point energy car that Tesla built. So reversible cold fusion was discovered by Tesla specifically because he was studying the carbon arc lamp. Now, if you get the carbon arc precise, you make cold fusion. The carbon arc precise, you make monoatomic carbon, which is otherwise known as Buckminster fullerene, which we know has the dodecacosa geometry, which is phase conjugator. And monoatomic carbon, like monoatomic gold, has many magical phase conjugate qualities. Centripetal, implosive, capacitive, and alchemic. That conversation with all the pictures at fractalfield.com/cold plasma. So, have we finished our story for the evening? Well, I hope we have. We're almost finished with the time here. Review. We started with the Shakespearean theater geometry hypercube, John Dee, as the layout for the stage for pairs of opposite emotions and opposing characters to create a symmetry situation where people could identify with everyone by having a sequence of emotions together that eventually enabled plasma fusion, the alchemy of human oneness experience. That's how we started. We talked about the alchemy of human relationships and enabling lucid dreaming, etc. And then we talked about the same alchemy of Platonic symmetry arrays, the self-similar Platonic geometry of both nucleus and electron, a new way to look at chemistry as precisely alchemic, implosive, and plasma fusion based. So the alchemy of chemistry enables us to have a new way to look at charge collapse, non-destructive charge collapse, as a realistic physics to talk about alchemy as isotope transition. And then we ended with an example of modeling isotope transitions, new equations for frequency and temperature, that actually charge collapse becoming non-destructive is precisely the true physics, and I do mean physics, of alchemy. And if we understand this, cold fusion and plasma fusion and the real physics of alchemy and transitions and transmutations is understandable as pure wave physics, and takes the beautiful romantic mystery and compares it with the physics and sees it the same. So we're not collapsing the metaphoric beauty of the story of alchemy from Emma Watson, and we're just saying we take the romance, we add the pure physics of self-empowerment, and we see the solution of both a spiritual mystery, a self-empowering solution, and a self-empowering solution to the chemical mystery that enables real wealth. And the real wealth is actually the charge distribution perfection, sometimes called heaven or the plains of Sharon, which is the pure intention. The reason that pure intention was always stressed as the real solution to the physics of alchemy, because in truth, your shareable intention becomes part of the electric field that enables alchemy to happen. So thank you. And finally, going to our chat window. Yes, I think what we need to do, Jilson, is send an improved script to Emma Watson and suggest the mystery of the Philosopher's Stone from the movie needs to be converted into a better screenplay. We need a better screenplay writer, but fortunately we have one here, Terry and Teresa Burns and Ellen. So Teresa Burns and Ellen, I think one of the ways in which we want to express our new manuscript here is as a screenplay for the kids. Harry Potter returns with the real science of alchemy. I see it coming. Okay. Yes, Alan says this is the dawning of the age of Oberon. Thank you. Joseph says, let's do it. Let's dream this together. Yes, so this is the homework assignment for tonight is now we all need to lucid dream this together if we felt each other emotions enough. Yes. Okay. So Alan says we're on it. Hermione Potter. Are we calling Teresa Hermione? That's good. We're now all the players in the play. The play's the thing in which we will capture the conscience of the king. Yes. Thank you, Joseph, for your kind words. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Let's make this message shareable. If we all become perfectly shareable as a wave, that's the only form immortality takes, and that's the real solution to alchemy. Thank you very much. Blessings, everyone. Sweet dreams. Good night. Bye. Take care. May all our waves be shareable.